for the last decade and a half, I have been working on a project that is quite personal to me. It invokes my personal history, but also my professional history, and I will talk a little bit about that later in the Q&A. But it surrounds really excavating and interrogating what is the sonic history of what we typically call the civil rights movement. In that interrogation of that history, what I am hoping to achieve in this multi-volume, multi-tiered project is to illuminate how Black women's voices have contributed to this sonic history of what we call the civil rights movement. Now, I want to tell you that it was never my intention to do this today, but after being here and hearing and thinking about the theme about the impact of music, I felt that rather than play you canned examples, that we would engage one another in music. So this lecture is going to center on two things that serve as central frameworks to what I'm arguing in my larger work, because there is much work that has been done on what we call the civil rights movement, and there are many people who have written on the music of the civil rights movement. So what makes your work so different, Dr. Kernodle? Well, first of all, and I'm gonna advance this a little bit more further today in what you will hear me speak and also hear me perform, that the civil rights movement as we know it isn't just simply a wave of activity that takes place between 1950 and 1980. In the last decade, scholars have began to question this chronological time frame. And one particular scholar, a woman by the name of Jacqueline Dodd Hall, began to advance the theoretical notion of the long civil rights movement. And invoking that framework, what she says is that rather than focus on one central period, that what we do is that we extend that lens to look at what has been a larger history surrounding social justice, racial reconciliation, and change. And so in taking that framework, other scholars have argued, when does this long civil rights movement begin? Some say in 1619 when the first Africans arrived, not far outside of Jamestown, Virginia. Others say 1865 when emancipation comes. Both arguments have credence, and I'm not going to debate them today, but what I want you to embed fresh in your mind is this notion of the long civil rights movement. If we take that framework, it means that whatever period we're looking at, that what we can see are the connective tissues that link these different waves of activity, but also culture and ideology that links these particular movements. It will hopefully bring understanding as to how does the current Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement intersect with what I like to call the mid-century Black civil rights movement. That period of activity that takes place in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now, much of my work centers around 1954 to 1978, and that is largely because I am basing my work in two landmark cases that in many ways highlight what is this contested period of social change. The first being Brown versus the Board of Ed in 1954, the second being the 1978 Bach versus the state regents of the state of California case, which argues affirmative action. Both of them set up what is our political climate as we make our transition into the 1980s. Now, the other part of this lecture that I want to illuminate outside of this framework of the long civil rights movement is the relationship that music had within this mid-century civil rights movement. It can be argued, and I don't have time, that music has always been a part of activism and the spreading and the formation of ideology. And so that framework of the long civil rights movement offers us an opportunity to hear narratives of resistance that are oftentimes not evident to us because of our contextualization historically about particular periods of Black life. But it is in this mid-century movement that the strategy for civil rights begins to change, particularly in the 1960s. And so I start my story. I start our journey today in 1961, because it is in 1961 that Charles Sherrod, Charles Jones, Cordell Stewart arrived in Albany, Georgia, to ignite what will become the Albany movement. Albany, Georgia, in the southwestern corridor of the state, is also part of the Black Belt, terminology that is used not only to frame the large population of Blacks that live in that area, but also to talk about the topography, the richness of the soil, which made it fertile ground for cotton, one of the mainstays. It is there in Albany that the movement begins to take a different shape and identity. Now, those three names that I gave to you were all SNCC field secretaries. How many people have heard of SNCC? All right, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was initiated by college students who in many ways grew frustrated by the approach of gradualism that underscored the earliest part of this mid-century movement, the period of 1955 to 1959, when we see the ascendance of Dr. King as the leader, but also this advancement of a strategy of nonviolent resistance. Now, in that part of the movement, most of the activity and the ideology was centered around economic boycotts, legal cases, and marches. But when SNCC comes on the scene, SNCC begins to progress in a more aggressive way this ideology, this strategy of nonviolent resistance. They subscribe to the notion of nonviolent resistance, but not gradualism. They subscribe to direct action. Let's move now. Not for change to eventually come, but let us be the provocateurs of change. And so they begin to employ two strategies in their protests. The first becomes evident February 1st, 1960 in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the Woolworth counter, when students come and stage what is the first sit-in. The next year, it is the Freedom Rides. And so throughout the South, what we begin to see is that this strategy of nonviolent direct action resistance begins to have an embodied form, embodied resistance, where the body becomes the agent of change, because the body begins to be used as the method to disrupt the function or the atmosphere of spaces. Sit-ins, wade-ins, pray-ins, marches. And they began to precipitate change, but also alongside this embodied resistance, they began to utilize a form of vocalized protest. This vocalized protest is not just about the oratory, the wonderful sermons and speeches that in many ways forms our common sonic history of this movement, but in time it comes to encompass something we call freedom singing. Now hear me, freedom singing had taken place before in the 1950s in the mass meetings that took place in the churches, but never in the spaces outside of that insularity, because it was thought in the 1950s that to march and to sing was disruptive. And so it did not fit into the politics of respectability. But again, we're talking about young people who want change now. And so in the midst of this embodied resistance, and in the midst of Albany, Georgia, the act of freedom singing begins to transition from the insularity of black churches and mass meetings to those spaces of embodied resistance. So I want to start there. What was this early context of freedom singing? And why was it so central, not only as a way of documenting the history and unifying minds, but how important was it in terms of shaping the ideology of social change? So let's go to the church. The first context of freedom singing that came out of those black churches focused on black congregational styles that were rooted in the Negro spirituals, but also in gospel music. And oftentimes, those activists would simply recompose those songs to make references to the people and the places and the ideas that they were promoting. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. While I'm on this freedom journey, I want Jesus to walk with me. I'll sing it one more time. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. I want you to take it from my mouth. Come on and sing with me. Walk with me, Lord. Yeah, come on. Walk with me. While I'm on this. Don't be scared. Come on. Freedom journey. I want Jesus to walk with me. Now look, this one a solo, so we're going to sing together now. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. I want you to imagine you going to face bull corners. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Come on. While I'm on this how to face the dogs, the hoses, the jail cells. They sat in those churches and they sang these songs, who drew their origins of resistance back to slavery. See, we think about the spirituals as being songs of sorrow, and many of them were, but they were songs of resistance. And those songs lay out what becomes the framework of freedom singing. Sacrality, space, and sound. Sacrality referring to the spiritual consciousness of enslaved Africans. Notice I didn't say religion or spirituality, spiritual consciousness. It is a consciousness that was really rooted in the pluralistic identities that Africans brought to America. It has been noted throughout the last few days that Islam was a part of that spiritual consciousness. Christianity was a part of that spiritual consciousness, but also polytheistic beliefs in which Africans saw God in everything that existed in this space. So they did not see the individual as the center, but the communal, the collective. This sacrality is important to us in understanding freedom singing and resistance, because it is the earliest form of resistance culture where enslaved Africans called themselves from the places of inhumanity back into their humanness. It is where they affirmed themselves as men and women within a system that robbed them of that. And that takes us to space, because these were songs that we think of as being sung in these open environments. But one of the spaces that really nurtured this spirit of resistance that underscores even the freedom singing that took place in the 1960s was rooted in nice forested areas that slaves would gather called the brush arbor. And it was there in the brush arbor that they reclaimed Africa. They reclaimed themselves. And that consciousness went into the praise houses, into the black churches as we migrated. And it became part of the landscape of the freedom movement when we go into the 60s. In sound, the sounds that they created did not cater to the spectrum of sound based in white European traditions, but it was a reflection of how Africans gave meaning to sound. Bent pitches, slid up to notes, had some very sophisticated and complex aspects of rhythm that not only rested in their hands and their feet and their voices, but resonated all through their bodies, and so there was a kinetic aspect to sound. These things underscored freedom singing because they were preserved in these practices and traditions. And they fed into popular music, but most importantly, they were cultivated in these spaces of insularity. And so Albany shifts the movement to a singing movement. We're just not going to speak about freedom. We're going to sing about freedom. Because as Bernice Johnson Reagan, one of the many song leaders that came out of the Albany movement, tells us that you can't offer a song and not change your condition. The vibration of the voice, the power of the voice has the power to shift the atmosphere. That speaks to the other African principle that is embedded in black music, which is the principle of Namo, which means the power of the word. Africans believed that they had the ability to change the atmosphere with what they sang and what they said. And so as this movement moves to singing, these things become evident in the narratives and the ideologies of these songs. Now, for a long time, freedom singing was centered in here, in the singing of these recomposed gospel songs and spirituals. But as we moved through the 1960s, freedom singing began to take on different contexts. Some of those contexts reflected what was the changing nature of civil rights in America. Because as we moved through the mid-60s, the backlash against the movement grew ever more hostile. In 1963, 2 weeks after Dr. King gave his immortal "I Have a Dream" speech at the March on Washington, 4 little girls in the basement of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, are killed as a bomb explodes. It will be the second time in this movement, but not the last, that Black children will be martyred just for the sake of freedom. And in the aftermath of that, we have President Kennedy being assassinated. The young portions of the movement, the young guard, began to grow disenchanted with the gradualism, disenchanted with Dr. King and his accommodating. And so freedom singing began to take on and shift in a different direction. Much of it was precipitated by the anger that was beginning to brew, not just in the movement, but in the Black community as well. On that Sunday morning, when those 4 little girls are killed, Nina Simone is sitting in her kitchen. 1963, Nina Simone was one of the biggest Black entertainers in America. Her music defied category. Some called her a jazz singer. Some called her a folk singer. Some even went as far as to call her a gospel singer. I don't think so, but we'll talk about that later. But she says upon hearing about the martyring of these children that she was struck. She was struck. It was her Damascus Road moment. And that her ability to assimilate all at once struck her and convicted her. And while she had been pretty much a silent supporter of the movement, Nina Simone at that moment was transformed into one of probably the most angriest voices to emerge of this time. She was significant in helping transition freedom singing from this simple Christian-based congregational style to a specific idiom of freedom singing that we call the message song. In 1964, inspired by the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, she tells us that Tennessee's got me so upset, and Alabama's made me lose my rest. But everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. First time that anger that had been surfaced boiled up. And much like strange fruit that had been displayed in the late 1930s, it was banned off of Southern radio. Record distributors sent the records back destroyed, claiming that the profanity of the title warranted the destruction, but it did not stop the song. And Nina Simone began to morph from just artists into activists. And she would come to really encapsulate what was this feeling, not always of anger, but sometimes of hope. And as the violence stretched into the mid to late 60s, Vietnam, Freedom Summer, and the murders of 3 college students in Mississippi, the bombings of churches, the disappearance of people, she would once again try to encapsulate In 1967, she took the words of Langston Hughes' last poem and she set them to music, giving us another great anthem of the movement called Backlash Blues. It would be released within weeks of Detroit, Newark, and all major black cities in America would burn. Mr. Backlash, who do you think I am? You freeze my wages and raise my taxes and send my son to Vietnam. You give me second-class housing and second-class schools. You must think all colored people are just second-class fools. Oh, Mr. Backlash, I'm gonna leave you with the blues, yeah. When I go out to find a job just to make a little cash, all you seem to offer is your mean old white backlash. But the world is big. It's big and bright and round, and it's full of other folks like me that are black, yellow, beige, and brown. Oh, Mr. Backlash, I'm gonna leave you with the blues. Mr. Backlash, who do you think I am? You freeze my wages and raise my taxes and send my son to Vietnam. You give me second-class housing and second-class schools. You must think all poor people are just second-class fools. Oh, Mr. Backlash, Mr. Backlash, Mr. Backlash, I'm gonna leave you with the blues. See, oh yeah. Now I know I'm running out of time, but I don't want to leave it there, because Nina also made message songs that were full of hope. In 1967, she also recorded a song that was originally written by the jazz pianist Billy Taylor shortly after the assassination of Dr. King. I'm sorry, not Dr. King, Kennedy. Trying to remember lyrics and everything, y'all. Work with me. Just a little bit of this. The song says, I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could change all the chains holding me. Oh, and I wish that I could say all of the things I should say. Say I'm loud and say I'm clear for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could give all of the love that's in my heart. all the chains that keep us apart. Oh, and I wish that you could know how it feels to be me, and then you'll see and agree how every man should be free. I wish I could be, Lord, like a bird up in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found out I could fly. Oh, I saw up to the sun and looked down at the sea, and then I'd sing because I know. I sing because I know. Ooh, I sing because I know. Oh, how it feels to be free. Lord, how it feels to be free. So by the time that Dr. King is assassinated in 1968, freedom singing is so steeped into America's consciousness that it will move beyond this mid-century Black civil rights movement, especially as the coalition that had jettisoned the movement in the early 1960s began to fall apart. White activists that had been a part of the coalition of SNCC would go on to found the environmental movement, the LGBTQ movement, the women's movement, and also the anti-Vietnam movement. Freedom singing will be indelibly linked with the contemporary social movement. And while the act of activists in real time singing seemingly disappeared, popular music artists would become the voices of the movement. As it relates to Black women, in the late 1960s, as Black consciousness was moving to Black power, soul music became the term used for a new genre of gospel blues that bore these messages of hope and change. Aretha Franklin told me, "Think about what you're trying to do to me," before she told us, "You better respect me when I come home." Now, those songs seemingly on the surface, for some people, seem to be odes to the movement, but they really weren't. But they reflected how different people heard Aretha's voice within this atmosphere of social change, so that Respect moved from being a song about a domestic relationship to a Black power anthem and a feminist movement anthem as well. Mavis Staples emerged out of this ecosystem of social change too as a voice with her family, asking us, "When will I get paid?" Telling us to march the Freedom Highway. And Roberta Flack, who seemingly only sang about love, had all of these hidden tracks on her albums that pointed directly to the movement. Songs like "Trying Times," "Go Up Moses," not "Go Down Moses," "Go Up Moses," and even some of these recomposed freedom songs like "I Told Jesus It Would Be All Right If He Changed My Name." That soundscape permeated the air and became the basis for so many genres of resistance music that would come out of the late 20th century. And so as I bring my discussion to a close, I have a question for you. What should I end with? Y'all want Roberta? You want some Mavis? Some Mavis? Some Roberta. Y'all said y'all my choice. We'll be here all day. They'll put me out. Just do. Do I have time to do them all? Do. Okay. Let's do a little bit of. This is Roberta Flack. On her first album, the album that had The First Time I Ever Saw Your Face, she recorded a song by her classmate, a man by the name of Donny Hathaway. The song said, "Trying times is what the world is talking about, yes. There's confusion all over the land, yes. Mother against daughter, and father against son, said the whole thing is getting out of hand, yes. But we know that people don't have to suffer if we would just love one another. But these are trying times. You've got your rights and your ghettos, and they're all around. A whole lot of bad stuff has been going down, y'all. I don't understand it, 'cause my point of view, I remember somebody said to do unto others as you have them do unto you. But we know that people don't have to suffer, Lord, if we just love one another. But these are trying times. People always talking about man's inhumanity today. But what are you doing to make this a better land? Pick up your cell phone, oh, turn on your TV. Oh, you'll see that people are demonstrating. They're trying to get equality. But we know that people don't have to suffer, oh, if we just love one another. But these are trying times. Trying times is what the world is talking about, yes. There's confusion all over the land. Mother against daughter, and father against son. Oh, I said the whole thing. But we know that people don't have to suffer if we just could love one another. But these are trying times. Ooh, trying times. Yes. Oh, Ella song. You know what? That's one I don't do. I'm going to have to add that to the thing. Ella song. I'm going to give you a little bit. This is Curtis Mayfield, but Aretha recorded this on her second album for Atlantic Records in 1968. I think y'all know this. It's one of those message songs that come out of the church. People, get ready. There's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage. You just get on board. Faith is the key to hear the diesel humming. You don't need no ticket. You just get on board. Oh yeah. So people, get ready for the train to Jordan, picking up passengers from coast to coast. Open the doors to boredom, 'cause there's room for all, among whose love the most. Oh yeah. You don't need no ticket. You don't need no ticket. You don't need no ticket. You just thank the Lord. Thank you.